and welcome to WorkVantage. I'm your host Sandhya Lakshmanan. Today, we're exploring how neuro-inclusion is redefining what it means to create truly inclusive workplaces. In this episode, we'll discuss what neurodiversity is, why it matters for organizations, and how thoughtful and intentional workplace design can create environments that support a wide range of cognitive and sensory needs. I couldn't think of anyone better to guide us through this conversation than Sargent, Senior Principal and Director of Thought Leadership at HOK. With over 4 decades of experience, Kay has collaborated with organizations of all sizes, from startups to Fortune 500s, to create the most innovative work experiences. Among her many accolades, she's also the author of Designing Neuroinclusive Workplaces, a book that turns years of research and practice into actionable strategies to create the most inclusive and adaptable environments. Welcome, Kay. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you here with us for this session.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Love to be able to join you today.
Kay, you often talk about how we're not just designing environments, but we're designing experiences. To get things started, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired your focus on neuro-inclusive design?
There's actually a little bit of an embarrassing story because I would love to be able to say it was my own personal experiences, or it was my children, or it was the individuals, but quite frankly, it was an appeal to my curiosity that really started me down this road. I was sitting in a room with a client about 9 years ago when we were getting ready to leave the room, and he asked, how do you design spaces for people that are ADHD? And I had an okay answer, but I didn't have a great answer. And we wanted to have a better answer for that client. So we started to do a bunch of research. And it was probably, honestly, like 2 years in before I really started to connect the dots with just my own children. Because at that time they were in school, they were learning, but really understanding that this isn't just about kids in school. Like these kids are going to go into a workplace one day, and we want to be able to make them thrive. And I think right now, people are very quiet. There's a lot of stigmatism, and so people aren't outing themselves and owning that in a lot of workplaces. Only 4% of the population that is neurodivergent will disclose that at work. And so a lot of people just assume that we don't have anybody that's neurodivergent in the workplace, when in the reality is it's very highly likely that we have at least 1 in 5 people in the workplace is neurodiverse.
Okay, from what you're saying, it really shows that neurodiversity can be invisible at work, even though it's much more common than most people realize. You've been exploring this space long before neuroinclusivity became a buzzword. And for those of us who are new to this conversation, how would you define neurodiversity?
So everyone is neurodiverse. We all think and process and feel and interact with things differently and uniquely, but we are not all neurodivergent. People that are neurodivergent tend to fall outside of what we would say is the predictable considered norm in society about how we respond to those things. They can be hypersensitive, they can be hyposensitive, they can process things differently. They might take a little bit more time, they might do it really super quickly, they might have different skill sets, that might have a very spiky profile, and so they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine. They're going to feel things first. They might feel it more acutely, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not impacting every single one of us. And so we really need to think about designing intentionally. So when we talk about people that are hyper and hyposensitive, so people that are hypersensitive tend to maybe be overwhelmed with sensory stimulation. They might need spaces that are more structured and ordered. They might need spaces that have less sound, less clutter. They might need spaces that are less dense, right? And so it enables them to be able to kind of process things without being totally overwhelmed. It doesn't mean boring or dull. It just means more simplified and controlled, ordered, and structured. Okay? And it also might mean maybe lower sound levels, right? Like, so we don't want to have a lot of loud noises in those spaces, and might mean more muted or natural colors. But on the other side of this, we have people that are hyposensitive. They actually need additional stimulation. They might need to interact with the space physically. They might need to move and stand and fidget. They might need to write on a wall. They might need music or a space that is a little bit buzzier, that has a little bit of vibe to it to kind of keep them going and keep them motivated. They might need brighter colors and patterns. And so our challenge is we have to create spaces that can accommodate both of those. I think designers have a gut instinct about what will work, but we don't necessarily always apply all the best practices and principles to designing inclusion. And I'll give you just a perfect example. A lot of places will put in a quiet room so that people that can't handle too much stimulation or noise or visual stimulation can focus. But if we then put like a wild color or crazy pattern or a graphic in that space that's really loud, we might have just short-circuited the person that we designed that space for. So we have to be really intentional about how we are designing space for the type of result that we want to get.
From your example of the quiet room, Kay, it shows that inclusive design isn't just about creating spaces, but also making sure that these spaces truly serve the people who use them. Building on that, how does the neuro-inclusive approach differ from the way we usually look at inclusive workplace design? Or let's say, for example, accessible design or universal design.
So accessible design really addresses physical abilities. Universal design is 7 aspirational principles, but it doesn't necessarily tell you how to execute them. So this is an inclusive design is really thinking about us as a whole person. Okay? So when we're designing for neurodiversity, that is really only one of the factors we need to be thinking about. In our research, we've kind of identified the 10 different things that define you as a person, and we are not addressing many of those. And those things can include things like, social economic, your level of education, your religious preferences, your gender, your sexual orientation, your age, your ethnicity, your physical ability, your cognitive ability, like a whole variety of things that define us as individuals. And if we aren't addressing those, and we're not, right now we're taking it very sequentially and kind of tackling one at a time. ADA and the UK Equalities Act did a great thing for helping physical ability and accessibility. A lot of what we're doing right now is addressing the mental and the cognitive ability and the sensory abilities, but we're still not touching on some of the nuances that we need to. And so there is a call for being even more inclusive in really addressing that. And a lot of the things, there's a lot of overlap, but there are still some unique things, and we need to take a more holistic approach.
Thank you for putting that in perspective, Kay. Now that we've explored what neurodiversity is, the big question is, why does it matter? And how can organizations realize its true value, especially when the focus is often on ROI? Essentially, how do we shift the conversation from cost to value?
So about 80% of a company's money goes to its people. If those people are not successful, if they aren't well, if they're anxious or they have a high level of burnout, then you're not getting the best out of them. And so there is a financial hit that we are all taking right now because we are not addressing this. But if we understand that every single one of us is impacted by sensory stimulation in the built environment, we all think differently, we all might have different social cues or things, the way that we interact. Anything and everything that we can do to make people function at a higher level and to be able to control some of those things that are distracting them or having a cognitive distraction will help them with their well-being, reduce burnout, can reduce anxiety, can make you feel physically and emotionally safe in a space. And then all of those things will lead to us being more productive, more engaged, and better well-being. And I think that's what every company wants.
Kay, you've really highlighted why this matters both for individuals and organizations. Based on your experience, what design strategies can actually make a workplace neuro-inclusive? And by taking this approach, does this benefit everyone?
Yeah, so if I could snap designers out of the just rows and rows of benching being the default for what we're doing today, I think there's two reasons we did that. London ran out of space like 25 years ago, so we had to go to things like benching. In certain parts of the world ran out of space, and so we had to densify those spaces. And it was kind of under this false flag of collaboration. But in many cases, people that are introverts shut down in those kinds of spaces, and a lot of people don't feel psychologically safe. So it's okay to have some of that, because some people do thrive in those and they can actually be beneficial. Like if you've got people that are like, for instance, in intelligence or in law enforcement who are sharing leads and they're hearing different things, it can be very beneficial for them. But for other people who are doing more individualized work and are trying to focus and concentrate, it can just be a horrible environment. And so having some options and choices, but not too many. Okay? There is such a thing as variety anxiety. If you have too many choices, or if a space just seems so disconnected and it's just overwhelming, then that's just visual clutter, and it can be overwhelming for individuals. So it's about understanding what a company is, what their goals and their missions are, the work style of their individuals, the demographic, the regional influences, the organizational structure. We know those things. Then we can start to narrow down what are the right choices and give people a little bit of choice, right? I might want to sit at a table with some colleagues when I'm feeling really good and I'm social and I'm right in there. But then there might be a part of my day where I really need to go off and kind of focus and concentrate, and I want to be able to do that. So understanding what people are doing and giving them a little bit of choice and some control over like how they engage with others and how they engage with the space itself can really improve productivity and well-being and create more inclusive spaces.
Those were some great strategies, Kay. That being said, what are some of the common pitfalls we should watch out for?
So if you're in a space where people are working for an extended period of time, you don't want to have a lot of wild patterns and colors that they are forced to look at all day. That can be overwhelming, and color comes into play really significantly. However, for people that are hyposensitive and might need a little bit more vibrant space, you might want to have zones that, like those social hubs that people can work in those spaces, and they have a little brighter colors, they might have a little brighter lighting levels, might have a little bit more sound, maybe music in those spaces. But you also then might want to have quiet rooms that are a little bit more snug, a little bit more comfortable. The sound is, much more controlled in those spaces. The lighting level might be a little bit different. And so this whole notion of one size fits all, which is a misnomer, right? We need to think about having a variety and option. And too often, it's like, all right, this is the desk, put it everywhere. This is the lighting level, put it everywhere. This is the acoustic level, put it everywhere. Like sound masking across the entire space. We actually don't want that. There are certain people that get bothered by sound masking, and they don't want to have that. They want sound mask free spaces. And then there's others that you might want to have music or a little bit of sound or a little bit more energy in those spaces. So we have to think about the variety of sensory zones in a space that reflect the work and the type of engagements that people are actually having.
Now that we've identified some of the pitfalls, could you also talk us through what the right approach would look like in practice?
Yeah, I think what we need to do is, once you have a deep understanding of what people are actually doing, right? If you're in a creative agency, there might be a lot more creative spaces than if you're in an accounting firm that's doing a very different type of work. So once you understand the type of work people are doing, and then you kind of can determine, okay, let's make sure that we have the right zones. Then it's about sequencing those zones so that they're accessible, but you don't take a quiet space and put it right next to a social space, because now you've just pureed those spaces together, and neither one of them is going to function well because they're just totally overlapping. So it's about creating the right kit of parts, but then sequencing it in the space so that the intent of the space stays true and you're not just blurring it all together. Far too often people have the right kit of parts, They throw it all into a space and they literally are just right on top of each other, and it just negates everything.
Okay, you've given a great sense of how intentional sequencing makes all the difference. So for designers or for organizations just starting out, what would a simple practical guide look like to create neuro-inclusive workplaces?
Yeah, I think we don't all get to start from scratch. There's a lot of companies that have a lot of square footage that is out there, and if I were to ask anybody, is your space designed to be neuro-inclusive? Almost nobody can answer that question because they don't know what that means. So we have a list of recommendations of things that you should think about when you are creating a space. And it's not about patching, right? It's about designing with intent from the beginning. But if you do have an existing space, you can take some of those considerations and you can almost use it like a checklist to say, okay, where are we on this, right? Are there any areas that somebody is sitting there having to stare at like a red pattern textured wall all day that might just cause anxiety and stress and be overwhelming to them? And can we change that wall? Can we paint the wall? Can we make it so that, we're orienting them different? Are there areas that the sound level just isn't right for the activity? It's either way too quiet or it's too loud, and there are spaces that are too quiet. And I think we miss that in many cases. People assume everything is too loud, but if you are in a space that's too quiet and you can clearly hear somebody having a conversation way across the way, that is far more distressing than if you're in a space where there's a little bit of buzz, right? And so it's really about kind of assessing the existing spaces that you have and seeing if there are tweaks and balances that you can make to create a more inclusive environment.
Okay, from what you've said, it's clear that even small adjustments can make a big difference to enhance inclusivity. To wrap things up, what are the essential elements of a holistic approach to making workplaces truly inclusive?
We have a whole process, and it's 10 steps, but I'm going to tell you the highlights. Getting the right people on board. There is a little bit of neurowashing going on right now about people who say, oh yeah, we got this, and they don't really understand it. So getting the right people on board. Education. We are on a massive education campaign right now to help people really understand what this is, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a lot of people that think, we don't have anybody that's neurodiverse in our organization. If you think that, you're probably kidding yourself. And then it's about listening and understanding and accepting that not everybody is going to experience a space exactly like you do. Just because it doesn't bother you doesn't mean it's not bothering somebody else. And so listening to other people's experiences and seeing things from somebody else's perspective is really critical and important. And then, this whole notion of nothing about us without us. Engaging with people that are neurodiverse and understanding those perspectives and understanding those unique differences. And it's about getting, whether it's HR or your leaders on board, so that this is a journey we're all going on. And then it's how we're designing the space. And we have a whole kind of list and steps about how we do that. Understanding the organization, understanding and developing the right kit of parts that addresses all the modalities of work, hyper and hypo, spatial sequencing, and then applying the principles and the elements of design intentionally to get the results that you want. Not what you think looks good, but what will help people function in that space at a higher level. We want to design spaces so that everyone can thrive.
That's perfect, Kay. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights with us today. It's clear that creating neuro-inclusive workplaces isn't just about ticking boxes. It's about understanding people, designing thoughtfully, and being intentional in every detail. For organizations, embracing neurodiversity is not only the right thing to do, but it's also a powerful way to unlock engagement, productivity, and well-being for their workforces. Whether you're a leader, a designer, or simply someone passionate about building more supportive environments, every small step towards neuro-inclusion can make a meaningful difference. To explore more of Kay's work, including her book and ongoing research on neuro-inclusive workplaces, please click on the link provided below. To our listeners, thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in the next session.